Welcome to our workshop, dear colleagues, and I'm delighted to introduce our today's speaker. Dr. Mariya Zubrytska is a well-known Ukrainian scholar in the field of literary studies, and she is an associate professor in Department of Literary Theory and Comparative Studies at the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. She is also a rector advisor for international affairs and project development, and her research interests include reader response theory and reader-oriented approaches to the literary texts, cultural and literary hermeneutics, methodology of literary studies. Please welcome our guest, and Pani Mariya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Pani Svetlana, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude for this unique possibility to do my research under the title Between Reality and Imagination, a special dimension of creating national identity in Ukrainian 19th century poetry within the framework of Indiana University Ukrainian non-residential scholarship. I would like also express my gratitude to Professor Russell Valentino, who kindly agreed to be my advisor, my consultant, and unfortunately, because of his traveling, he could not to join us today. Before to start my presentation, I would like to make some brief introductory remarks. Since I will talk about 19th century, and I will talk about poetic discourse, let me remind you the event at the end of 18th century. So following the abolition of autonomy in the Hetmanate and the Sloboda Ukraine and the annexation of the right bank of Volhynia, Ukrainian lands in the Russian Empire lost all traces of their national distinctiveness. The territories were reorganized into regular Russian provinces, gubernia, administrated by governor appointed from St. Petersburg. With the liquidation of the siege and annexation of the Crimean Khanate in 1783, the sparsely settled southern lands, named Novorossiya or New Russia, were colonized by migrants from other parts of Ukraine, as well as smaller number from the Balkans, Germany, and from Russia. This colonization movement greatly expanded Ukrainian ethnic territory. And at the very beginning of 19th century, the concept of Ukrainian nationality had almost disappeared, and Ukraine, forcibly divided between two empires, Austria-Hungarian and Russian, vanished from the political arena as well from geographical maps of the world. Let me share my presentation. You see the old map from 18th century, where is name of Ukraine.
Pani Mariya, I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but I don't think we see your map.
You don't see?
No, we don't see it.
Just a moment.
Just your slides.
Share screen.
Yes, please.
And okay.
Loading. Yes, wonderful.
Yes,
that's great.
Wonderful.
Here.
So you see the last map, before forbidden and ban of the name of Ukraine, you see the last map. It was 1920, but at the beginning of 19th century, Ukraine as a subject disappeared from the political life and from the geographical maps of the world. Russian imperial propagandists started to say that the etymology of Ukraine's name originated from Ukraina, literally outskirts of either Russia or Poland, trying to question the very existence of this so-called border country. The Ukrainian language has been repeatedly banned, particularly in 19th century. Nearly every Russian ruler in 19th century proposed a new law prohibiting the teaching of Ukrainian in schools, the publication of Ukrainian language books, communication in Ukrainian, and even the direct extinction of Ukrainians as a nation. The name Ukraine has been banned as well. And in my research, I am trying to answer the question, how did this happen? The terms Ukraine and Ukrainians become more and more widely used in Ukrainian poetry of 19th century and gradually displaced other names. It should be remarked that at the beginning of the 19th century, official usage of the term Ukraine referred only to Slobozhanщина. This explains why representatives of Kharkiv Romantic School used this term to oppose Ukraine, Zubrytska Ukrainian province to Little Russia, Chernihiv and Poltava provinces, which corresponded to the former Hetmanate. And please see on the map, I put on this map famous Ukrainian poets and intellectuals of 19th century who radically changed the very discourse of national identity. And as you see, they represent all regions of divided Ukraine. From western part of Ukraine, Bukovina and Galicia, to the Zubrytska Ukraine. From the south to the north. And all of them used poetical discourse of nation which is united by language, with common values, common collective memory, and which should have a future because it has a great past. In my research, I make analysis of interconnection between toponymy and identity and perception of identity through toponyms. Particularly, I would like to study the role of symbolic landscapes and place names as identity markers in text of well-known Ukrainian poets of 19th century. To this moment, my particular focus, my concentration is Western Ukrainian Romanticism, Kharkiv School Romanticism, and so-called Kyiv School of Romanticism, and how they were trying to keep alive the name of Ukraine and develop discourse, so-called Ukrainophilia, and to trace this transition from Kozakophilia to Ukrainophilia and to national consciousness. Briefly speaking, I would like to study textual representation and maps of the past and the future Ukraine and its territory in 19th century poetry as imagined discourses and mental maps. And here is my answer to another question. Why does exactly 19th century Ukrainian poetry? My answer is from the poems of Taras Shevchenko, To the Dead and the Living and in and War. And you see a responsive map that layered the past, present, and future through the literature. And that is why I will be focused on this responsive map, and the same way of thinking I found in Rory Finning, who were trying to understand Taras Shevchenko communication with compatriots, and historian Friedman on his concept past in the future. It is about the politics of identity. To my mind, Ukrainian poets of 19th century used a new strategy, so-called perception to action strategy. And they managed to design and construct the social imagination and mental map, about which I will be speak a little bit later, exactly where this was one of the tools of creating this and impacting on the social imagination. Ukrainian poets of 19th century start a movement from the text to the mind of readers. And what is most important, they initiated the process of mapping new national feelings and national consciousness. Here I would like to focus on the concept of emotional community, which proposed Barbara, I forgot the name, American well-known Rosenwein, Barbara Rosenwein. She developed a concept of emotional communities and textual emotional communities. It is about how text of poetry or of fiction could influence the feeling of a wide audience of readers. And my another answer for the 19th century question, why exactly this question I choose for my proposal, for my project proposal, I will answer that 19th century is a century of map makers of national dream. Because Ukrainian poets of 19th century started to think about the fixation of the integrity of Ukrainian territories, of the union of divided lands. And please take attention about the intention of Georgy Andruski, the youngest member of Kyrillo-Methodian Brotherhood, who drew up the map proposal for Slavic Union that would have 7 members. And Ukraine, in his version, including the Black Sea, Galicia, and Crimea. And the repetition of this map, mental map, imagined map, we will see in the text of famous Ukrainian poets from different areas of Ukraine. Another tool which Ukrainian poetry of 19th century used to develop the discourse of Ukraine and Ukrainophilia, they started to discuss the issue of Ukrainian literary language, how it looks like, how it should be developed under the suppression of Russian imperial politics. And this is a map just to show you, this is a map just to justify the vision of Kyrillo-Methodievsky Brotherhood, why they decided that Crimea and Black Sea is inscribed into the text of Ukrainian poetry of 19th century, should be included to the territory of Ukraine. It is one of the oldest maps. Of course, my focus, my main concentration will be on poetry of Taras Shevchenko, because exactly Taras Shevchenko and his mapping of Ukraine and its territory made it was like a revolutionary approach and revolutionary vision, which help the next generation of Ukrainian poets to use his language and to develop his idea. And to your attention, I would like to quote Andrew Wilson's, his well-known work, The Ukrainians, Unexpected Nation. And he mentioned the role of Shevchenko as a map maker. Taras Shevchenko gives a much clearer answer to the question of who is Ukrainian and who is Russian. The eastern boundary of Ukraine was now not just the River Don. Please keep in your memory River Don, because it is one of map point of all Ukrainian poets in 19th century, and the geographical Asia that lay beyond. The difference between Russia and Ukraine was above all cultural and political, a love of liberty for one's own against the imperialist desire to rule all other in chain. And this is quotation from, in English, from Shevchenko. І мене в сім'ї великій, сім'ї вольній, новій, не забудьте пом'янути незлим тихим словом. And in the great new family, Ukraine is regarded by Shevchenko as a new family. The family of the free. Family of free people. And it is imagined, it is the future, it is the attempt to foresee Ukraine in the future as a free country and of free people. And this is the motto, a main motto of all 19th century Ukrainian poetry, and it could help us to understand why Ukraine and Ukrainians were fixed in 19th century poetry regardless the suppression of Ukrainian language, regardless the ban of the name of Ukraine and the ethnonym Ukrainians. Exactly in 19th century, Ukrainian poet wrote a text of national anthem, Pavlo Chubinski, and Alexander Konevsky, who wrote another spiritual anthem, Prayer for Ukraine. It was in the mid of the 19th century, and it was the second wave when Ukrainian poet developed the ideas which Taras Shevchenko articulated in his poetry. I just would like to remind you that Ukrainian poets of 19th century, why they are national builders or why they were trying to construct national identity, just covering all the issues of national life. Translation of the Bible. And we have three attempts in 19th century to translate the Bible into Ukrainian language. Markian Shashkevich, the representative of Western Ukrainian Romanticism, started the first to translate the Bible. The second was the Morachevsky, and the last, Panteleimon Kulish, and Ivan Puluy and Ivan Nechui Ilovetsky. Unfortunately, the full translation of Ukrainian translation of the Bible appeared only after the revolution 1905, and we understand why. So you see that in 19th century, we have example of community of dreamers, great dreamers with a huge number of great ideas, how to develop Ukraine, how to reach its future. But when we are talking about the spatial dimension of national identity building, the central and key issue is place and space as location for discourse. And here is correlation of this place and space as location for discourse with maps, with geographical maps, but in our case, with mental and imagined map. In my research, I will try to cover two themes, very interrelated. play space as it produced in Ukrainian 19th century poetry and as a topic of discourse. Place and space as the location for discourse. So coming back to the map, it will be, it is visualization, the places where Ukrainian discourse, where the model of the Ukrainian future has been developed. You see that the majority of current regions of Ukraine in 19th century represented or made investment into the development of the Ukrainian dream and a Ukrainian discourse. Location is western part of Ukraine and Slobozhanщина, Kharkiv School, Poltava, Chernihiv, central Ukraine, and southern part Ukraine. It is, I will demonstrate at the end of my presentation why it is so important. But particular intention in my research, I would like to focus on interconnection between toponymy and identity and perception identities through toponyms. Particularly, I would like to study the role of symbolic landscape and place names as identity markers in the text of well-known Ukrainian poets, and textual representation of the maps. I like very much one of the topic of my research, spatial metaphors as identity markers. And it is very important because we are talking about the poetry. Just remind you, it is well-known fact, you would like to see by years the first Ukrainian almanacs. And Український вестник, Український журнал, Український almanach, Русалка Дністрова, you see the places. Kharkiv, Budapest, Odessa, Kyiv, Petersburg, Kyiv, Chernivtsi, Kherson. The southern part of Ukraine will be at the third wave of this poetry attempts to fix Ukraine as the name and to fix integrity of Ukrainian territories. For your attention, Ukrainский almanach and the majority of articles were written in Russian, of course. There is no Ukrainian language. Ukrainian language is banned. But O Malой России, it is very important. We will talk about imperial discourse, which propose to call all Ukrainian territories previously as a little Russia, as Malaya Россия. Please take a look for publishing activities in 19th century. You see Ukrainian books published in the Russian Empire: St. Petersburg, Moscow, Odessa, Orel, Kharkiv, Kyiv, and 100 items. In the Austro-Hungarian Empire: Vienna, Budapest, Prague, Pochayev, Lviv, Warsaw, Krakow, Przemysl, 103 items. Languages: in which these books were published: Ukrainian, Russian, Church Slavonic, Latin, Polish, German, Slovak. If you are interested in this publishing activity, I just decided to show you the slide because it is about geography. It is about dissemination of Ukrainian life and Ukrainian word in 19th century because of this suppression of all Ukrainian in Russian Empire, and publishing activity moved to the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And it is very interesting fact. I will remind you a very sad and dramatic for our history document. It is Amsky Edict. And according to this edict, which became a law, Ministry of Education of Russian Empire just mentioned 3 cities, Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa, to take a careful inventory of the teaching personnel to the Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa education district, to remove from libraries of elementary and secondary school throughout Ukraine all books written in Ukrainian or by Ukrainians, to instruct all local schools authorities to prohibit teaching in elementary schools any subject in Ukrainian language. But take a look. To expel suspect students and teachers, to accept as general rules that teachers in the Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa educational districts must be Russians. Nothing changed until today. During our war, we see the same policy. We see the same approach. Just bring teachers from Russia, or to force teachers in occupied territories to teach at schools. It is Amsky Edict. It is 19th century. And please compare with nowadays. To close the Kyiv branch of Imperial Russian Geographic Society, and you will see why. And I will tell you briefly. A lot of Ukrainian intellectuals, a lot of Ukrainian poets were a member of this geographical society. And when you will take a look to this edition, Ukraine under Western Eyes, which has been published at Harvard University, and Steven Siegel is a professor of human geography. It is a very correct and very interesting comment to this Ukrainian maps. And this map is a special kind of map because Ukrainian poet, the author of National Anthem, is a cartographer. It is карта южно-русских наречий и говоров. When you will take a close, it is published by Russian Empire, but Ukrainian language is divided and is regarded as Narechi and Govor or dialect. And you will see a huge territory where we have Ukrainian dialects, even on the territory of the current Russia Federation. And you can understand why Emsky edict banned and closed the Geographical Society in Kyiv. This is about dialects and adverbs of Ukrainian language in this map. And throughout the 19th century, used the term how to make a definition of the writing or text written. Little Russian, Ruthenian, Galicians, and finally Ukrainian. And about half of century, it was also viewed as a legitimate part of Russian literature. You will see why on my map, I put Gogol, Mykola Gogol, not only because Gogol problem, not only because that Gogol is regarded only as a famous Russian writer of Ukrainian origin, but because exactly Mykola Gogol described the landscapes, Ukrainian landscapes, and he's corresponded with the first rector of Kyiv Imperial University. He wrote that he is working on history of Ukraine. And to his mind, Kyiv is, been, and will be always Ukrainian. And exactly, Mykola Gogol wrote about the steppe, not only about the river of Dnieper, Чуден Днепр при летней погоде, on exactly wrote about the wild fields, Diké Pole, about the steppe as a unique territory of Ukraine. So the next, what I would like to tell you, just to give some examples of, to finish, of how it looks in poetry. The most easy way to follow this discourse development of Ukraine and its territories and mapping of Ukraine, frequency of word usage in Shevchenko's Kobzar words Ukraine, you see Shevchenko used 200 times the word Ukraine, Dnipro 80 times, Kyiv, and the same you can follow in the text of other poets. The mapping of Ukraine in Shevchenko poetry looks like rivers: Dnipro, Dniester, Danube, Don. Markian Shishkevich, the representative of Western Romanticism, the same, but also he included Bug, Danube, Dniester, Dnipro, Bug, and Don. The same when we read the text of Kharkiv School of Poetry. And you will see the same mental or imagined map of Ukraine and its territories. There are a lot of text in the middle of 19th entitled Ukraine. It is dozens of titles of Ukrainian poets. But I also will take a look to the other issues, the issue of such like the steppe, the garden, садок вишневий коло хати, as a bucolic idyllia of Ukrainian life and the way of Ukrainian life, the forest, the wild fields, дикі поля, чумацький шлях, etc. So a lot of work to do. I do hope I will try, due to the scholarship, to cover all issues and answer all questions which I put in my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pani Mariya, for this wonderful, interesting, and extremely informative presentation. So, dear colleagues, I think we can now open the floor for our discussion. And I would like to remind you that you can type your questions in our chat, or you can simply raise your hand and ask the questions, because there are now so many people in right now. So please. Okay. I have a privilege as a moderator, I have a privilege to ask my first question, probably. Actually, I have many questions. I have wrote down many questions, but let's start with the Pani Mariya. You have mentioned in one of your slides that 19th century Ukrainian poetry demonstrated a revolutionary revitalization of the Ukrainian language and articulated a specifically Ukrainian identity. And then in the next slide, you mentioned the quotation, which is, by the way, one of my favorites, of Andrew Wilson, that difference between Russia and Ukraine was above all cultural and political, a love of liberty for one's own against the imperialist desire to rule all other in chains. So my question is, what were the peculiarities of the Ukrainian identity? What of this specifically Ukrainian identity besides a love of liberty? Thank you.
Exactly, it is freedom, it is liberty. And all representatives of Ukrainian Romanticism are talking about вольний дух, free spirits. It is a very complex issue, because from one hand, everyone is talking about the steppe, open space. That the necessity to the вольний дух or free spirit, it is like the consequences of the existence and being facing the open space, wild fields, дике поле. And this openness of space, and Mykola Gogol said that Ukraine is damned by wild fields, but from another hand, Ukraine is happy because wild fields gave Ukraine the feeling of feel spirit. So freedom. Exactly, it is freedom. And even currently in ongoing war, when we quote Shevchenko, в сім'ї вольній новій. And the word вольні люди, воля, вільний, it was the base for developing a new image of Ukraine. It is Ukraine of the future. І на оновленій землі врага не буде супостата. Оновлена земля, this is renewal of Ukrainian lands due to the freedom.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
If there is Nadia Goncharenko.
Please. We cannot hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am so glad that I can take a part in this conference, and I would like to thank Pani Mariya and ask you about. In one slide, you said that Ukrainian 19th century poetry managed to start movement from the texts to the minds of the readers. Please explain more detailed about this process. What you have in mind when you tell us about this? Thank you.
Exactly. It is one of the key issues of the notion of imagined communities and imagined readers. Wolfgang Iser and Hans Robert Jauss, as a representative of Constant School of Reception, they made the argument that every poet built the third space between the reality and imagination, and the poetic text is a mixed message of real and fictive. And they write taking into mind the general ideal readers. Ukrainian poets do not take into account real readers. They write their poetry for this ideal imagined community, the next generation, which will be able to perceive their text as a message to the action. In spatial term theories, I mean that the same term, the third space, and spatial term theories are based on the thesis that this imagined readers is a structural element of the text. In the text of Ukrainian authors, you have this brothers, sisters, земляки. I don't know how to translate into English земляки. And this appealing to brothers, very general. It is general audience of readers, sisters, and земляки, or мертвим і живим і ненародженим моїм землякам в Україні і на Україні живущим. This is like parameters of general audience, wide audience. But this wide audience exactly means imagined audience. People who are able in a proper way to perceive a message inscribed in their text. I will use the theory of Paul Ricoeur, and Paul Ricoeur insists that using of live metaphors, and I will study live or special metaphors which build bridges between the current situation and the future. And from this point of view, when you will see and follow all live metaphors in the poetry, in 19th century poetry, you will see that they are rather build bridges to the next generation, not to the real readers, because real readers, a very limited number, because banned Ukrainian languages, teaching in Ukrainian, there is no libraries, there is no schools, and you can understand why Shevchenko and other poets were trying to prepare bukvar. They understand that their poetry will work during the next generation. And I mean this, that from the text message which is put in the text can unite different audience of readers and emotional community. When you are mapping the past of Ukraine, when you are talking about Ukrainian landscape, it means that you build contour of emotional community of readers. And this emotional community readers are inscribed in Shevchenko poetry. Садок вишневий коло хати, it is like a буколіка і мертвим, і живим, і на оновленій землі, etc., etc. So there will be three levels of my thesis, reader-oriented theories, Israel's implied readers. It will be Paul Ricoeur, live metaphor, and will be special term theories, which key position of which is that every map is a story. When you're looking at map, you would like to have a story. And when you map in Ukraine, Ukraine does not exist. There is Russian Empire. There is no Ukraine. But Ukraine exists in Shevchenko poetry. Why does it exist? There is no Ukraine. There is no Ukrainian language. But in Shevchenko there is. And the next generation will ask, why Shevchenko was wrote about Ukraine, which was not present at the map. I don't know if I properly answer on your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. More questions, dear colleagues? Yes, please, Natalia, please. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Pani Mariya, for your presentation, and I appreciate the maps that you showed. And I was wondering if you did any, if you covered in your talk how, because I was a couple of minutes late, if you covered in your talk how these writers presented Ukraine in relation to Russia and Europe. As when you showed the maps, we have at least two empires, the Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Franco, in one of his letters, was at some point hoping for some collaboration with writers under the Russian Empire, but then he reached the point where he got disappointed about the delay that was taking place in terms of this collaboration for obvious reasons. As you mentioned, there were those language bans and persecutions as well. But I would also assume that this positioning of Ukraine in relation to Russia and Europe would be different for the writers who were writing under the Russian Empire and under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, simply because they were coming from different perspectives and different cultural and historical backgrounds. So I'm just wondering if you somehow covered that aspect of imaginary maps in a more global, maybe we can put it this way, in a more global sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very good questions. Perspective, European perspective, how Ukrainian poets of 19th century see Europe and Russia and relation between Russia and Europe. Let me say that it is not the focus of my research, current research. It is special term, but I would like to answer on your question that mostly Russian literature of 19th century was based on anti-Western rhetoric, yeah, except Chadayev and some liberal poets. But this anti-Western rhetoric is not present to such extent as in Russia poetry. So when we are talking about relation with Russians and Russia, it is a good issue and a long talk, because every Ukrainian poet mentioned in his or in her correspondence about the difference, not in poetry, but in private correspondence. You find a lot of materials about difference between Ukrainian and Russians. Even if you will take my issue, Gardens, Sadok Vishnevy, and difference between Ukrainians and Russians, a lot of Ukrainians poet fixed in correspondence. When you cross the border of Yuzhnaya Russia, you will see a beautiful gardens. So it is very good topic for research. It is not my issue, but very good question about European perspective, because it is neutral and you will see all differences, how Ukrainians see and how, but during the all 19th century. And at the end of 19th century, you will see much more pro-European perspective, how it see Lesa Ukrainka, Olga Kobylyanska, and Ukrainian poet modernists. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Pani Mariya. And just a quick note, since you mentioned the garden, Luba Yakimchuk in her poetry collection, Apricots of Donbass, also writes about apricots tree as a natural border between Ukraine and Russia. And it's a very, very, I would say, very touching, right? Very touching image when she says that as soon as you cross this official border between Ukraine and Russia, you don't see apricot trees in Russia anymore. So it's kind of reminded me, your talk reminded me of that image. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We probably have time for one more question. Pani Mariya, so thank you for sharing this map by Pavlo Chubynsky, Karta Yuzhno-Russkih Govorov. Could you please remind the date when the map was published? Are you aware when?
In 1873.
73. So basically it's before the EMS ukaz, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, because we all know that according to this EMS ukaz, one of the measures was to exile Pavlo Chubynsky because he was very dangerous for the regime, right? So he was allowed to publish this map before the EMS ukaz.
I just decided to share the slide because to see that very strange. There is no Ukraine. There is no Ukraine on the map, but still people are talking in Ukrainian language, narechia or govore, even on the territory of Russia. And it is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. And on behalf of the organizers of this workshop, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to all of you for joining us today, and especially our deep gratitude, many thanks to our presenter, Dr. Mariya Zubrytska, and to all our Ukrainian scholars who are enduring so much all these days. We admire your spirit and we admire your courage so much. Thank you our deepest gratitude for being with us today.